Welcome to the Sovah Says Show. This is our special Bengals 2025 season recap show. A look at what went wrong, what went right, and we'll be handing out some of the awards for some of the biggest moments and accolades that I had certainly watching the team in 2025. Speaking of what's coming up on the show, we talked about awards. We'll be handing out awards like MVP, Unsung Hero, feel good moment of the year, things like that. We're going to talk about that very controversial, as far as on X, Duke Tobin press conference on Friday. I have some thoughts. We'll go over some of these really important quotes. And while it was nice to hear from Duke for the first time following a season like that, we still have a lot of questions, probably a lot more questions than he gave answers yesterday. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the defense. We'll talk about what went right, what went wrong, just a full encompassing recap of the season. And let's get into it right now. So the playoffs are starting today. It's wild card weekend across the NFL. Big slate of weekend games. And unfortunately, your Cincinnati Bengals are not a part of that. Mostly, and if you ask Duke Tobin, this is exactly why they didn't win enough games. 6-11 was good enough for third in the AFC North, and that's just not going to cut it when you have a team with Super Bowl aspirations. I don't think anybody, especially Bengals fans, if you would have told them in the summer things would have finished with the record the way they did and in the standings the way they did, we all would have been instantly brokenhearted, because this team has enough talent, or at this point had enough talent to make a serious run. And for a variety of factors, which we'll get into, it did not happen. It was frustrating, which was another word. We'll go back to Duke to reference Duke Tobin a lot, I'm guessing, in this show. Frustrating. I'm sure a lot of Bengals fans were frustrated with finishes, were frustrated with injuries, were frustrated with contracts that bled over into training camp through the preseason and then ultimately through the season. It just was a lot of bad. So let's talk about exactly what went wrong for the Cincinnati Bengals in the start of training camp. I think there was a lot of hope. A contract dispute between Trey Hendrickson and the team, caused him to miss all of training camp. Finally coming to an agreement on sort of, not the full extension like he was hoping, like fans were hoping, but I think they found some sort of middle ground to at least allow him to hit the practice field for the start of the season. And what ended up happening is that blew up in their face when, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, Trey Hendrickson was injured, suffered a hip injury, and was basically done for the season. They held out hope. We came and saw the trade deadline come and go. I'm not going to say a lot. I think Bengals fans were split down the middle as far as what to do with Trey as the trade deadline came up. And I think there was the argument that obviously the season wasn't going the way they had hoped at that point, and it was time to get what you could. I think the obvious sentiment around the team was that no matter what, Trey wasn't coming back after this year, so you might as well get something for him in a trade. Because we didn't want to go through what we went through through the offseason with the holdouts, hold-ins, just the negative impact, the negative vibe around his contract and his status, and whether or not Trey was happy, whether or not Trey was going to even play, whether he was going to hold out throughout the entire season. So I think some Bengals fans were just really eager to kind of get out of that purgatory of whether or not Trey was going to be with the team or whether he wasn't. So the other half, the other faction, I think still held on some hope that Trey could come back and be that closer he was, even though he didn't play in the preseason or training camp. He still was a closer. He still closed out games. He closed out that Jacksonville game with a big sack to end it. And I think that if there was just a glimmer of hope, if Flacco could have helped them and then ultimately gotten to Burrow and Trey was healthy and back on the field, and the way the AFC North was playing out at that point, nobody really wanted it. It was kind of like, you take it. It was like this hot potato between the three contenders for the North. So if you held on to Trey and you were able to get him healthy and back on the field just in time for another one of their, typical December runs where they get a ton of they get a ton of wins in a row and kind of propel them into playoff status. Now last year they went on that incredible run and just fell short because Kansas City decided to lay it up and allow the Denver Broncos to get an easy win and sneak in. But we didn't get that this year. So now there's going to be a lot of second guessing the organization, second guessing just the team in general, whether or not they made the right decision, and ultimately saw Trey for a couple of games and then just, watched him sort of hold in. I never want to, entirely doubt a person's will, whether or not he was healthy enough to come back, whether this was, a business decision for him to not suit up towards the end there. I feel like Trey's more of a warrior than that and loved his teammates and would have been out there if he could. But, there are going to be people out there that love a good conspiracy theory and maybe thinking that, Trey got what he wanted, got some money from the team and just sort of chucked up the deuces on him. Also, week 2, you lose your franchise player, you lose your most important player, Joe Burrow, for a majority of the season. That certainly didn't help. I think a lot of us thought that, again, there was two sides of this. Some people were just like, there it is. He'll never come back. If you listen to the Twitter docs and some of those medical people online and didn't feel like it was a possibility for him to even come back. And what Joe did to even get back early was incredible. And Joe, I should just start calling him Burrow, because obviously Joe Flacco was a godsend. What an amazing trade. But Joe Burrow's injury certainly didn't help, and it sort of affected a lot of facets of the team. But not quite the offense for a good stretch there. But the other big factor was first year coach Al Golden and his defense. And it was rough, especially early on. Al Golden came in as a familiar face, for some more familiar than others. Obviously, he is a neighbor of Zach Taylor. But I think coming off of what he was able to do at Notre Dame and their run to the title game last year and how dominant their defense was and how opportunistic and always on the attack, very aggressive defense at Notre Dame. A lot of Bengals fans, including myself, I may have been one of the louder voices, really championed the hiring of Al Golden. That's who I wanted. Not just, hey, I could find a few reasons why this is the guy and why this is the guy that'll help. No, this is the guy when the position was open, I wanted them to go after, because I saw what he taught his defense at Notre Dame. They were fundamentally sound. They were aggressive. They were opportunistic. And I thought he could do that. He had familiarity with the team. He had some familiarity with the roster. When he was the linebackers coach in 2021, when they made that magical run to the Super Bowl, he was on the team and the linebackers played great. Think about Jermaine Pratt's, game-winning, ceiling interception against the Raiders in the wild card round. Logan Wilson had more interceptions than any linebacker in the NFL first 4 seasons of his career. So, a lot of that could be attributed to Al Golden and some of the things he taught that team and those players. So I thought that, Al Golden was going to be this guy that really took this defense and fed off the late season momentum the year before. Because remember, Lou's defense in 2024 was awful. But what we came to realize over time, and once the bye week happened last year, and he was forced to sort of embrace the younger players on the team, is it brought juice and it brought energy and it brought life to that Bengals team. And what they were able to do was really go on this run and play some complementary football. It wasn't just the offense week in and week out leading them to victories. This defense was a top 5 unit over the last 5 games of the year. If you took the numbers that they had and averaged those out over an entire season, they would have led the NFL in turnovers and takeaways. They would have been a top 2 scoring defense. This was a really solid unit that came into their own, that found some legs, found some energy with guys like Myles Murphy and Jordan Battle, guys that didn't get the chance to play under Lou Anarumo because, he loved his veterans. He loved those Sam Hubbards and Von Bells and players like that. So what they were able to do at the end of the year was really special. And I think, a lot of us felt that Al Golden, having come from the college game, would embrace the younger players and then really capitalize on what they did at the end of last season and sort of, see an amount of carryover. I mean, in training camp, those guys looked great. They were flying around. They had some attitude. They were the ones doing all the talking in camp. And, it sort of felt like this, like evenly matched, push and pull between the defense. One day the defense wins, one day the offense wins, and the next day the defense wins. And guys like Jordan Battle and Demetrius Knight really flashed in camp and showed off some, athleticism. And it felt like, oh, here we go. This is, we get Evan McPherson back on track. And this team looked like it was going to be, clicking on all cylinders and playing some real complementary football from offense, defense to special teams, which was going to help change that narrative that they were able to get off to a fast start. What did we hear all offseason? Slow starts. They got to start fast. They're always digging themselves a hole in the standings to start and then having to go on an incredible tear like they did in 2022 with a 10-game win streak. And what did we get? They won the first 2 games of the year. Now, obviously, Burrow gets hurt in the first half of game 2, and Jake Browning leads this team to a victory. And you thought, okay, well, Jake, based on what he did a couple years back when Burrow hurt the wrist, was going to be able to keep them afloat and keep this momentum going. And until they got Burrow back, if they did, it wasn't all doom and gloom until we saw literal doom and gloom from Jake Browning with maybe the toughest 3-game stretch of his career. I mean, obviously the toughest 3-game stretch of his career. But to continue with Al Golden and the defense, whether or not he felt like the guys that he had just weren't ready for his entire playbook, we saw a defense that was as basic as it gets, and the defense that blitzed the least in the NFL. Now, when we saw him at Notre Dame, they blitzed a ton. They didn't do that here. And when you have injuries to Trey Hendrickson, and when you have injuries to Shamar Stewart, who was your first-round pick, who was brought in to be disruptive and to get after the quarterback, he's hoping to get home with 4 guys, but his 2 starting defensive ends are injured for a large chunk of the season. And so, you've got to manufacture pressure at that point. If your four aren't getting home, you can't just sit back and watch them pick you apart, which is what they absolutely did for a long stretch of the season until maybe, after enough practice and starting to get comfortable and thinking guys were understanding the concepts and schemes he had, then they were able to start to mix in a little bit of a blitz package that worked at times. And you were sort of wondering to yourself, where was that all year? Where was this all season? Why were we so reluctant to do this? And we had the turnover of, Logan Wilson playing for, 5 weeks and starting and then getting benched for Barrett Carter, a 4th round pick that took his lumps. Barrett Carter, known as, a very good pass coverage linebacker. I thought he was one of the best coverage linebackers in the entire draft coming out. So I was excited, very excited with the selection of Barrett Carter. And it looked early on like it was a little too much for him. But whatever they saw in the practice field and whatever, they saw in games, it was enough to elevate him over Logan Wilson, who they ultimately traded to the Dallas Cowboys. A trade that I just didn't like. To me, if you're going to start 2 rookie linebackers, they have to be at the absolute top of their game. You can't have – you needed that veteran presence out there. You can't have 2 guys, young guys that are struggling. Even if Logan wasn't having a typical season like we're used to, he really needed to be out there to be a veteran presence, to be a voice in the huddle, to be someone calling out motions and just being a level head and a veteran presence who had seen, 4 or 5 years worth of NFL snaps, so that position wasn't just, a deer in headlights at times. And so I didn't really care for that Logan Wilson trade. They got nothing in return. And, this is the guy that wore the green dot. This is the guy that had the C on his chest, and you traded him for nothing and you benched him for nothing. I understand he asked for a trade request, but I don't think he deserved to be benched at that point. But once he moved out, and once it was Barrett Carter's job, he showed those rookie inconsistencies where you flash here, you flash this game, and you struggle in the next. But, obviously they took their lumps in 2025. And Zach talked about that in his end-of-year presser about sort of, we got valuable reps, and those guys are going to be better. And whatever lumps we took – and if you follow Miles Murphy's brother Max on X, he sort of said the same things, Maybe they needed this season, and you never want to say you needed a terrible season, especially when your Super Bowl window is wide open. But maybe they, worked out the kinks. Maybe they got those, reps that they desperately needed, and the experience that those backers are going to have going into 2026 is invaluable, and we'll see how, that translates with Demetrius Knight Jr. and Barrett Carter. But we'll also see if in the offseason they go and get that veteran. There's some good veterans that are out there in free agency. Now, they typically haven't been an organization that likes to pay a lot of money for free agent linebackers, but maybe they feel like, this is just a position group in general that needs a voice. Duke talked about, we need leaders. We don't have any leaders on defense. Well, that's what happens when you trade away your defensive captain and the guy with the green dot on his helmet. You lose maybe the biggest leader they had on that entire unit. So with Al Golden, at the end of the season, towards the end of the season, again, they sort of went on a little bit of a mini run. And in the final game, I know on the final drive, it was sort of back to normal. But that game against the Browns, they only allowed 2 field goals for the entire game. The offense gave up 2 touchdowns. The offense allowed the Browns to have 2 defensive scores. That's not on the defense. The defense, played their hearts out in that game and should have come away with a victory. But, maybe it's better in the long run. Now they have the 10th overall pick. If they would have won that game, they're probably sitting at 12 or 13. So just a really tough year. We saw some glimmers of hope from, guys like Myles Murphy, DJ Turner, Dax Hill, Jordan Battle. Those are young guys. Are those cornerstone guys that they're going to build around? It remains to be seen if money talks with those guys. Duke, said that Dax and DJ, those are guys that you want to keep around. Those are guys you want to keep. Those are cornerstones, and we don't have any stones. So I think it's time to break out the checkbook and start writing some checks before the price becomes a little too expensive. Maybe the biggest talking point throughout the second half of the season and immediately thereafter and sort of the speculation and the wondering was Zach Taylor going to lose his job? 3rd straight season not making the playoffs, and you've got guys like Burrow and Chase and Higgins and Mims and Orlando Brown Jr. And you had an offensive line this year that, according to some, was a top 10 pass blocking unit in the entire NFL. When have all we've ever asked for is middle of the road, right? Joe took, a band of 3rd stringers to the Super Bowl and probably would have won it if he had half a second more. Woulda, shoulda, couldas, and what ifs. And we sort of blame the offensive line for that. And we've been upset with the offensive line for injuries that Joe's had, whether it was the knee his rookie year or the wrist after getting hit by Jadeveon Clowney in 2023. 2024 is able to stay healthy. They were a mediocre unit. But this was the best unit he's ever had, and it showed. And it showed in the rankings. It showed in the stats. Some of those sacks that Joe takes are going to be on Joe, because Joe Burrow's going to be looking to make, the extra guy miss and keep the play alive. And sometimes you just got to get rid of it and live to play for another day. And sometimes Joe takes those sacks that are a little unnecessary, but you have to sort of weigh the good and the bad, because sometimes if he would have just gotten rid of it, he doesn't spin away from a rusher and then roll out and complete a 25-yard pass or more. So it's sort of the good and the bad with that. But to get back to Zach Taylor, did he deserve to lose his job? This is a team that has failed to live up to expectations. And if you look at the moves that have already been made around even their division, Kevin Stefanski, a 2-time coach of the year in his 6 seasons in Cleveland, fired. He made the playoffs in 2023. John Harbaugh, after 18 seasons, out. He won a Super Bowl. He was a missed field goal from from winning 3 consecutive AFC North Division championships. That wasn't enough for ownership and the front office, and they got rid of John Harbaugh, maybe the greatest coach in the history of their team. Maybe. Brian Billick, I'm sure, will have something to say about that. But the argument to keep Zach, I don't think holds water. I know Paul Dehner Jr. wrote a great article for The Athletic this week about needing some consistency, and that was the reason to stick with Zach and this staff. No changes made by Cincinnati at any level of the coaching staff. So You're getting everybody back. We're getting full run it back mode. And I know it probably feels like we're running our faces into a brick wall hoping for a different outcome, right? But I don't think I could keep Zach Taylor around after this. I understand, their two highest players, quote, their two highest players were on each side of the ball were gone and for a majority of the season. I understand that. But when I hear that, and then I look to the Bay and I see that the San Francisco 49ers in week 18 were playing for the number one seed in the NFC, and they were missing their top receiver the entire season. They were missing maybe the best linebacker in the NFL for half the year, if not more. Brock Purdy missed about 6 or 7 games. Those are the most important guys they have. Nick Bosa, their best pass rusher, out for the season, missed half the year. That team continued to win. That team continued to contend for an NFC number one seed. Our team continued to find ways to lose down the stretch. 2 of the worst losses I've ever seen the Bengals take in the 35, 40 years I've been watching this team, and they've been my favorite team. No, it's going to be 40 years. Yeah. The way that they found a way to lose to a terrible Jets team at home, giving up that lead with under a minute left. That was embarrassing. Every single team that lost to the Jets this year fired their head coach at the end of the year, except for the Cincinnati Bengals. Where are your standards? What would it take? Now, because Zach made a Super Bowl, does that give him a lifetime contract? He's obviously had more postseason success than Marvin Lewis. But if you look at his record in the AFC North and you look at his record in general, other than those great Decembers, the Bengals have a horrible record under Zach Taylor. What are we doing? What needs to happen? Do they need to go and get the number one pick? And then they'll say, well, how much is Joe Burrow and guys like, Jamar and T, are they championing? Are they fighting for Zach's job? And the Bengals just kind of acquiescing to, their demands? What I would say to that is, yeah, you want your quarterback and your star players to be happy. But on the other hand, Zach's all they've ever known. So they don't know if there's anything better out there. They don't know if, what Zach is teaching or telling them, that's all they've ever heard. So they don't know whether it's BS or not. Obviously, they look around the league and see other teams having more success. They're not blind. But I think they're comfortable. And I think, so just because Joe makes the amount he does and he plays the position he plays at the level he does, sometimes Zach needs to tell him this is what we're doing. Sometimes the front office needs to put their front foot down and say, we hear you, but this is what we're doing. I know everyone's paranoid of the moment where Joe is upset and Burrow is asking for a way out of this team. And, it's the Carson Palmer saga all over again. I know we're paranoid. We're petrified of that moment. And if you, follow the national media, they're pushing for it. Hey, the Rams got 2 picks in the first round this year, and they can all the cap space in the world. They're going to go get Burrow when Matt Stafford retires. Are they? Would you listen to that? The Jets have 7 first-round picks they could offer over 3 years. They could do that. That sounds great, but a draft pick isn't a certainty. as we've known, as we found out as Bengals fans, especially with Mike and Duke making picks. So I think they deserve to move on. I think Zach deserved to lose his job. He didn't. Mike Brown releases the statement. We're running it back. So we got to root for Zach again. And hopefully we could see a little more, fire in him. A little less of the excuses that we hear at the podium week in and week out. Everyone, just loves to hear, I have confidence in the guys we have. Well, you're the only one. And I think it's time that you wake up or we get rid of you. But, he made a Super Bowl in 2021, so we're all happy. And our standards are as low as it gets. So, Zach, we got to have a lot more in 2026. Now, this isn't just the doom and gloom show. That obviously they didn't make the playoffs, so there was going to be a fair amount of negativity here. But I want to talk about some of the bright spots for the Bengals in 2025. Chase Brown. Man, Chase Brown had another great year. And we found a run game with Scott Peters. And Scott Peters, man, what a great hire. If there's anything that they did absolutely right in 2025, it was hiring Scott Peters, who turned that offensive line into a strength, helped Amarius Mims become one of the best tackles of any side. We're going to get into we're starting to get into Willie Anderson territory. Now, stop. Let me clarify that. Willie Anderson gets dinged because people say he was just a right tackle. Willie Anderson was one of the greatest tackles at any side we've ever seen in NFL history. Amarius Mims is not just a very good right tackle. He's one of the best tackles at any side in the entire NFL. That's what I mean. The right side doesn't mean anything as far as his talent level. He is a phenomenal pass blocker. And in 2025, he became a very, very good run blocker. And that can be contributed to the hard work he's put in and attributed to Scott Peters. What a home run signing. Sign him to a lifetime contract. Just kidding. But no, Scott Peters, maybe the brightest spot for the Bengals in 2025. What he did with that unit, he had two rookies at one point, then bringing in a free agent late in camp. Dalton Risner, what a pickup Dalton Risner was. So the offensive line, I salute you. Wow. You were a godsend in 2025. And I hope every one of those guys gets to run it back, the same way that the coaching staff and front office is in 2026. Other bright spots, we talked about Chase Brown, what he did, over 1,000 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns rushing, also receiving the ball. Chase Brown was their third leading receiver with 437 yards. The third most targeted player and had the third most receiving touchdowns. Chase Brown was a legitimate dual threat at the running back position. And he's a guy that seems to just continue to get better and continually be a guy that, those first 4, think about what he did after those first 4 or 5 weeks when the run game couldn't do anything, literally anything. He was averaging under 2 yards a carry and was getting no yards. Then he turned it on full throttle. We're looking at a guy that had 11 total touchdowns. I mean, he's a fantasy, a big piece for your fantasy team. So Chase Brown, major bright spot. Could we use another back? Because maybe Taj Brooks isn't what we thought. Samaje Perine, although Samaje Perine had a great year. Samaje Perine is getting old, another year older. Chase Brown is still a guy to feed the rock to, and Chase Brown was one of the biggest bright spots for the Bengals in 2025. Evan McPherson. Now, if you subtract what we saw in that final game where he had an extra point blocked, he missed another one, Evan McPherson was back to being Money Mac in 2025. 89% field goal, from 50, he was 5 of 8, which is still pretty good. Extra point wise, if you take away, the 2 that he missed, he only missed 1 before that last game all season. So Chase Brown, the special teams as a whole, you had multiple guys on that unit that were ranked in the top 75 for guys on special teams in terms of grading and tackles and play. So Darren Simmons gets a big bounce back year from his unit, and great in coverage. Rico's still a great punter. McPherson is back to being the guy, and I think a lot of that too has to do with the long snap and the whole unit as a whole. So hats off to the Bengals special teams, the Bengals offensive line, and Chase Brown in 2025. All right, we've sort of been referencing all show about the Duke Tobin press conference here and there, and using examples of what happened and what sort of they went through. What I'd like to point out, sort of some specific comments. Now, Duke opened with like a 4.5 minute opening statement that sort of took accountability for things. Although later he did sort of throw certain people under the bus, sort of, underhandedly or backhanded. One of the things Duke Tobin said that really stuck out, there is no comfort zone. And I would agree. I think we all would agree. Quote, there is no comfort zone. So what does that mean exactly? There is no comfort zone. They've made a series of moves, and it's reflected in a poor record. And no, he's right. There should be no comfort zone. Everyone should feel uncomfortable. The only problem with that statement is when you bring back a coach who has missed the playoffs 3 years in a row with some of the players on this roster, especially last year when everyone was healthy the majority of the year, it sort of tells me that, you know what, there is a comfort zone. There is no reason to feel uncomfortable. I have already done everything I need to do to have all the safety in the world. Now, if he would have moved on from Zach Taylor and said, there's no comfort zone, I could have an easier time believing you, because I see better than I hear. And what I see is there's absolutely some comfort in the front office, with the coaching staff, with certain players, because they know that nothing they do will have any consequences. So Duke, that quote right there was really, really stuck out to me as being a large pile of BS. What he also said, we dug a big hole. It's hard to dig out of a big hole, end quote. Yeah. The hole you started digging started in the offseason when you had one of the worst defenses in the NFL the previous year, despite, what they were able to do at the end, we talked about. And you signed 2 players on defense, TJ Slayton and Oren Burks, a linebacker that was just sort of a rotational guy that was brought in to, be a special teams guy and have some snaps on defense. Although he was a great player in the postseason for the Eagles, he was never given any consideration at being a starter after the draft. And his play throughout the season didn't really warrant it for whatever reason, whether it was the lack of opportunity or consistency. And you signed a nose tackle. Okay. But you were a horrible team against the run, and it didn't really show up at all. Maybe they were gun shy after losing DJ Reader, and the results they got the previous year with free agency. But TJ Slayton was a solid enough player if you were able to still continue to add pieces around him. TJ Slayton was never going to come in and just fix your run defense woes. Maybe the quote that most people are talking about that sounded a little like back talk, a little like passing the buck. When asked what needs to change with this Bengals team, Duke said, "Our record. We need to win the games that we should win instead of finding ways to lose games that we should win. But we change every offseason." He's right. Your record needs to change. He's right. The players found ways to lose games that they should win. The Browns game the final week, the Bears game, the Jets game, many more that the second Steelers game, the Patriots game. He's right. They're losing games, but it felt a little more like he was deflecting there to the players. And the players absolutely need to be accountable for missing assignments, for missing tackles, for not having, enough energy or enough will on certain plays to finish the playoff. Sometimes it felt like a guy was lollygagging at the end of a play, thinking that his teammate was going to finish. And when they didn't, he was no longer in position to make the play himself. You can't assume that the play is over when it's still going. Never assume that the play is over, especially on defense. If you are coming for the ball carrier and your teammate beats you there, your job is to get there second and finish the wrap up until the whistle. Your job is to play all the way through the whistle. And too many times we saw players that did not do that and just figured their guy had it and kind of laid out. And when their guy didn't, we saw touchdowns. We saw broken coverages. We saw even more missed tackles because of bad angles and bad pursuit. So, yeah, they need to find ways to win. They need to find ways to close. When your closer is hurt for a majority of the season, your top closer, that's a problem. Trey just has a knack for closing games out at the end. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be back in 2026. That door is all but closed. So maybe that's Myles Murphy, who had 5 sacks at the end of the season to really open people's eyes about the player he is with the opportunity he's got. Do they bring back Joseph Osai? We'll find out. Maybe Osai played his way into a bigger contract, and maybe there are guys on the day 3 of free agency. Maybe Joseph Osai is a day 1 free agency guy now. And we know the Bengals, they're not day 1 free agency players. They've never been, ever. Unless it's bringing back their own. And they've got some really big decisions to make and some no-brainer decisions to make on certain guys they need to bring back as their own. Duke said, we want to run it back with that entire offensive line. Well, you know what? 2 of those guys in the middle are unrestricted free agents. And both of those guys, one this week being a little more vocal, both of those guys, Ted Karras and Dalton Reisner, have stated they want to come back. And Dalton Risner has said everything he can about loving it in Cincinnati. And the guy next to him on his other side, Amarius Mims, has said, I want Dalton Risner next to me my entire career. He is the best right guard in the NFL. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. But you know what he is? A damn good right guard. And the best right guard they've had since Bobby Williams? Maybe? You know, I can't think of anybody better. If Zeitler played right guard at times, then it would be Zeitler. But even if it's since Zeitler, that's been a while. And Dalton Risner is a guy that they absolutely have to bring back. Remember how excited we were to get Dalton Risner. Remember how much we were begging over social media. Maybe, Duke's burner accounts saw enough of those. Maybe Katie got tweeted at enough times to where she was like, hey, why aren't we looking at this guy? Who knows? I will always say this, Bengals fans. You don't think you have a voice? You do. Always apply pressure. If it feels like you're yelling into a void, which a lot of times for myself it does, continue to yell. Continue to be a voice to push the change that's needed. And I feel like we did that. And I feel like we got what we asked for in Dalton Risner. And what an incredible pickup for them. Another thing that Duke said, we need pass rush. I'm a guy that believes in the front on both sides of the ball, offensive line and defensive line. That is my focus. People might not believe that, but that is my focus. I don't know that people don't believe that. Maybe in free agency when there were guys that could have been added. But over the last, 2 years, they drafted Shamar Stewart. They drafted Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson. They've addressed the defensive line. I mean, with your first pick, you're drafting Shamar Stewart, a guy that I think was a bit overvalued, to say the least. I actually removed him completely from my draft board because of his production scores and lack of production altogether. I definitely wouldn't have taken him in the first round. However, he is a agent of chaos when he's healthy and when he's back there. And we saw that week 18 with maybe his best game of the year and how disruptive he could be. I think his 2 best games of the year, and he, obviously was hurt for the vast majority of the season, but his 2 best games of the year were against the Cleveland Browns. So Shamar was obviously a guy that they took on the offensive line, or on the defensive line, and continued to push to have a pass rush, hopefully get something out of them. And so they drafted Myles Murphy in the first round. Joseph Osai is a 3rd round pick. They've drafted. They haven't always drafted maybe the guys we wanted, but they've addressed the position the way that they thought they best needed to. So I don't really think that anyone doesn't think that they feel like they need a pass rush, other than not taking care of Trey's contract properly. But they certainly have through the draft. Myles Murphy got maybe the most snaps of his career this year, and it paid off. He is one of the most improved players, and we'll get to that later, by a long shot on this team, and had the best season of his career, and was a guy that could do both things. Could stop the run and could get after the quarterback. Was a disruptive force. So we appreciate how they've addressed the pass rush in the draft. I think they really need to do it, maybe even in the first round again this year. They've got some guys that could really help, depending on how things fall the way they do. This was a quote that maybe felt like maybe the most contentious or defensive. We've made a lot of good picks. If you were to grade, I think the picks, as a positive or a negative effect on the roster, I think in Duke's time here, or let's just call it the Burrow era, right? I think it's about 50-50. And sure, they've made a lot of good picks. When Duke is under the basket and needs to just hit a layup, man, they knock it out the park. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, right? Those guys were absolute no-brainers, and they have been absolute home runs. T. Higgins falling to the second round, no-brainer pick. Huge selection for them. But when it's taken some, time to think about and not necessarily the top pick, Amarius Mims, home run, middle of the round. That one you could brag about. Absolutely. Pound the table, Mike Potts, for that one. Pound the table, Duke Tobin. But guys, later in the first round, it's taken Miles Murphy some time, but now they're starting to get the rewards from it. So it's hard to be I'm going to call Miles Murphy a positive pick because I think that the draft evaluation was done properly. What they saw, they recognized was done properly. But the coaching staff and Anarumo's reluctance to play young players when he had, his Sam Hubbards and Trey Hendricksons stunted the growth of a guy like Miles Murphy. And what we saw this year was him fully coming into his own and really showing off to be a player that, we could root for next year and be excited about as a starter from day one. It remains to be seen, is how they use Shamar Stewart. I think some of his biggest plays have come from the inside. So maybe he's, an interior rusher on third downs or on passing situations. And you see Miles Murphy on the outside and somebody they bring in the first round, like a Ruben Bain or a David Bailey or Arvell Reese, somebody maybe on the edge, the other side. And then we've got 3 or 4 really athletic rushers coming. That could be exciting. But overall, I think with Duke Tobin, I think, we appreciate some of the candidness. That's I don't want to be too critical of Duke there, with being defensive at times. I mean, he put himself out there for over an hour to take questions, and hats off in the media to guys like James Rapine, Ben Baby, Trags. Those guys really asked some questions that needed to be asked, that felt like they heard the fans' voices and really tried to encompass those into the press conference. I think one question in particular I liked from James was calling out, their lack of second-year guarantees and contract negotiations. And, Duke even said, we're going to talk about contracts at this point in the season. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about everything, I think, was what the media was sort of holding them to. So, hats off to those media members that really tried to get to the nitty gritty with Duke as much as possible. He's a master of deflection. He must have grown up watching Kung Fu flicks because he was, blocking some of their best punches. But hats off to Duke Tobin hats off to the Bengals media for holding, Duke Tobin's feet over the fire for a majority of that press conference. But also hats off to Duke Tobin for making himself available, hearing the fans and putting himself out there to answer the questions and be, about as transparent as Duke can be. So we're thankful for that. So now I want to get to the part of the show here where we do some rewards, or should we do some awards? These are going to be the first annual Sovah Says Bengals Awards here. And I want to start us off here. Let's just start off big. Let's talk about the MVP. And typically, it's a quarterback award. Typically, it is a statistical award. But let's go through the nominees here and let's talk about who. Let's get this nominee list up here. Let's look at the options here. I'm going to have 4 nominees per award. And so we've spoke about, it's always a quarterback award. Well, this year on the Sovah Says Awards, the quarterback is nominated. So Joe Burrow, nominated, only played under half a season or maybe half a season, getting in 8 games. So typically that's about half a season there. Ja'Marr Chase, what can you say about Ja'Marr Chase coming off of a Triple Crown season and having another great season with 3 different quarterbacks, mind you? That may be the most impressive part of the season that Ja'Marr had. Obviously didn't put in, couldn't quite catch, Njigba with some of the stats that he had, but Ja'Marr had a great year. T. Higgins, what can you say about T. Higgins? The most touchdowns in a season in T. Higgins' career, back-to-back seasons with double digits, just under 1,000 on 59 catches for T. T did miss some time with the concussions, and but when T was out there, he was a guy to be respected, and he was a guy that you were going to find in the end zone almost weekly, it felt like, as one of the top targets for either quarterback, whether it was Flacco, Burrow, or Browning. So those 2 receivers that had to do it with 3 quarterbacks, you have to take your hat off to those guys. And if you guys want to put in the chat what you're thinking, who your vote would be for this before we unveil it, feel free. So Ted Karras. Ted was the leader of the offensive line. We talked about the offensive line earlier and Scott Peters' job with those 5 and I guess 6 if you talk about Jalen Rivers and the contributions he made starting a couple games. Ted Karras played every game in the middle of that offensive line and helped lead that unit to being the best unit that they've had since the days of Willie Anderson. Even better maybe than those Whitworth lines. I'm saying this offensive line was as good as those days when they had Levi and Bobby and Big Willie and Steinbach. Like there was no weak spot, and you had a pair of rookies that played some significant games. One that, started, 12 games this year. So for me, when all was said and done, the 2025 MVP, Sovah Says Bengals 2025 MVP award goes to, it's got to be Joe Burrow. It's got to be. I know he played half a season, but what he showed in those games was the effect he had on the whole unit, the ability to make people around him better. I know he had 2 losses. We had 3 losses, but 2 of those losses, it's hard to pin the Browns loss. Well, no. Allow me to rephrase that. He had a chance to redeem himself in that Browns game by leading the come from behind drive at the end of the game. Unfortunately, the defense then gave up their own. So he possibly would have went 6-2. He was near perfect in that Bills game until the back-to-back interceptions. But what he was able to do in those other games and getting the team off to a fast start, I'm going to go with Joe Burrow as the MVP. Receivers aside, they were great. The offensive line aside, they were great. But what Joe showed me is that Joe is the most important part. Joe is the engine to this team, and what a great year for Burrow. when healthy, obviously. 2025 Rookie of the Year nominees. Now, this is a Bengals draft class that maybe wasn't the most touted, wasn't the guys that I think a lot of us were hoping for each round as the draft unfolded. I think we all had done a million mock drafts and predetermined guys in our heads that that we liked, that we thought were the should have been the selections. But for me, it's the four guys that got the most playing time, and that's the two guards, Dylan Fairchild, Jalen Rivers. Both Fairchild got a significant amount of starts and was just solid from day one. Even in the preseason, was one of the highest graded preseason linemen. Dylan Fairchild, I think a lot of people were hoping for his teammate at Georgia in the draft. And could they have taken him in the second round? Was he available? Absolutely. Tate Ratledge was there, and I feel like Demetrius Knight Jr.'s career and Tate Ratledge's career for fans are going to be sort of intertwined until Demetrius Knight makes some Pro Bowls. Also, we talked about Demetrius Knight Jr. and the two linebackers had a ton of reps. Knight Jr. was a starter from day one. Ended up having over 100 tackles. 4 sacks. This is a guy that was able to flash on the stat sheet from time to time and also took his lumps with bad angles and missed tackles. Barrett Carter was a starter by midseason and sort of forced the Bengals' hand to make a move with Logan Wilson once he was taken out of the starting lineup to trade away one of the best linebackers and the team's defensive captain. Barrett Carter ended up having a season over 100 tackles, the same exact amount as Demetrius Knight. Now, he did get an interception, but was not the pass rusher and given the pass rush reps that Demetrius Knight Jr. Was. So for me, the 2025 Rookie of the Year goes to, it's got to be Dylan Fairchild. That offensive line was one of the best we've seen in a long time around here, and a lot of that goes to the rookie Dylan Fairchild and his ability to shore up that left side of the offensive line and just really become a very good player. PFF had him, for whatever those grades are worth, if you're a PFF guy, PFF had him as the highest graded left guard that they had in for a rookie. And he also made Dane Brugler. Everyone loves the Beast, and Dane Brugler had him on his all-rookie team. So for me, I just saw a lot more consistency. Now he had his fair share of rookie ups and downs, but far more ups for Dylan Fairchild. I think that Dylan Fairchild is going to be a guy that could be evolve into a Pro Bowl style player and caliber player in the future. So he is our 2025 Bengals rookie MVP. All right, the next award is going to be for the most improved player. Now, this was actually a nice little list to put together as far as guys to choose from. Guys on both sides of the ball. I feel like the defense really, by the end of the year, had shown to be guys that really stepped up and improved. And I'm going to go with our 4 nominees. So I've talked a ton today about Amarius Mims and the improvements he's made and elevating himself into damn near elite status at right tackle. He is a guy that is an absolute home run pick for them in the draft and has justified everything that people are saying about him. You've seen the way way he's neutralized TJ Watt at times. He deserves all the praise in the world. One of the most improved members of the Bengals team. I've talked a great deal about Myles Murphy and the improvements he's made. A career season for Myles Murphy. 5.5 sacks, a career high. Tackles for loss, we're looking at, 6 tackles for loss. Would like to see him in the backfield in the run game a little more, but is still a stout player against the run. So what we learned with Myles Murphy was more reps, more snaps, more opportunities, more production, equal more production. And you can't always say that about guys. Some guys, the moment's still too big, even with all the reps. Myles Murphy took his opportunity, took his chance, ran with it, and became a very nice player on that Bengals defensive line, the guy that they really needed at times. DJ Turner, career year from DJ Turner. This is a guy that in training camp, we were looking at I don't know if DJ Turner is going to be a starter. I mean, he may be a back of the roster guy. He is having a horrible camp and even more rough preseason. And what DJ Turner did was once the real lights came on, he played some real lights out football. That game against the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers, the interception he had on the sideline, that's one of the plays of the year for them. DJ Turner had 2 interceptions this year, 18 pass breakups. That's a huge number for him. He's one of the highest graded corners by most metrics in the league. Did not get a Pro Bowl nod. Did not get an All-Pro nod. But don't get it twisted. DJ Turner, one of the best defensive backs in the league. So, our most improved player for the 2025 season goes to the drama, the drum roll. You know what? It goes to all 4 nominees. Shout out to Jordan Battle, who led the Bengals in interceptions with 4. DJ Turner, who had a top 5 number of pass defenses. Myles Murphy, a career high in sacks, and Amarius Mims being one of the anchors of one of the best pass blocking lines in the NFL. The award goes to all 4. All 4 guys were 1,000% deserving of this award and deserve all the recognition and look like, I'm going to say, they look like cornerstone pieces going forward. Again, Duke said, we need cornerstone guys. We don't have any stones. Well, you've got 4 right here that you need to extend and you need to continue to build around to be B level, B plus level, or better players. Amarius Mims, DJ Turner, those guys were A-level players in 2025. All right. Our next award is the Unsung Hero. So for Unsung Hero, I looked at guys that, maybe weren't as talked about or played a position that maybe didn't get, typically the recognition of your quarterbacks and receivers, your skill position players. So the 4 nominees that we had, Amarius Mims, got to be a guy that, we're going to talk about Amarius Mims a lot today because what he's done as a right tackle, as a tackle in general, anchoring that offensive right side can't go, unnoticed or has to be mentioned. Samaje Perine, as a guy that obviously Chase Brown gets a majority of the carries, a majority of the targets, and reps. Samaje Perine is still a guy that comes in as a change of pace back, was able to average 4.5 yards per carry. Still was able to be a threat out of the backfield receiving. He had 21 targets and 17 catches on him. Didn't have a touchdown this year, but what we saw from Samaje Perine was picking up the blitz. His pass blocking in the backfield was huge. I'm sure a lot of you saw that viral clip from week 18 with him picking up the blitzer and giving Burrow enough time to hit T. Higgins downfield for a big gain. Those are the types of unsung moments that give you an unsung hero. BJ Hill. BJ Hill just continues to be BJ Hill. I mean, in every single way, like still a guy that gets in the backfield, 4 sacks this year for a defensive tackle, still continues to be a force against the run, had 66 tackles on the season. I mean, that's a guy that when they need something from the interior, BJ Hill just seemed to be a guy that was there. And Evan McPherson, we talked about Evan McPherson a little bit earlier, just kind of returning back to that money mac mode, a guy they could count on from deep, a guy they could count on with their extra points, obviously, until the final game, which we'll toss out. But Money Mac went back to being a guy that could win games for them, that could continue to be consistent, and could keep them keep the kickoffs where they needed to be so that teams didn't get the best field position. And their special teams unit this year as a whole, hats off to Darren Simmons, that whole entire unit was top tier in this league. So our 2025 Bengals Unsung Hero Award goes to Samaje Perine. The pass blocking that goes unsung and unnoticed, picking up those tough yards, those 3rd and shorts, those 4th and shorts, being a guy that could still count on outside of the backfield, got little to no recognition. So on the Sovah Says show, we make sure that we are shouting out our guy, our unsung hero, Samaje Perine. All right, this is going to be a fun one. This is the best new guy. So this award goes to the free agent pickup, the trade pickup, pretty much the veteran who came in this year and, made the biggest difference, had the biggest moments, was just a guy that had an impact that they really needed. And so for me, those nominees went to Dalton Reisner. Talked about Dalton enough. What a great season. What a great pickup he was. They pick him up essentially in training camp. A guy that Bengals fans have been begging them to sign for at least 2 years, maybe more, and never seems to find a home, never seems to have a place that loves him and respects him and gives, him any sort of long-term stability, and just continues to produce and be an anchor. So Dalton Reisner, definitely a best new guy nominee. Keyshawn Williams, brought in at the end of the year. And what does he do? He turns that kick game upside down and looks like a guy that, really has some skill as a return guy, is a speedy threat at the position. We all love Charlie Jones and what he is able to do from week to week. But man, Keyshawn Williams is lightning in a bottle when he gets his hands on the ball, and hopefully a guy that is able to stick around and they keep around. Our other nominee, Joe Flacco. What can you say about the job that Joe Flacco did at the age, having started the season in Cleveland with a division rival, and after Jake Browning kind of busted out after a few games and didn't have the best season, they are able to pull off a trade, a rare in-season trade with a division rival, with an in-state rival at that, and grab Joe Flacco and start him 2 days, basically, maybe a little more, maybe like 4 days after the trade. And what did he do? He had a rough first half in Green Bay, but then he almost won the game for them in the second half once he was able to sort of get his bearings and take off. And then the following week, on a short week, He's barely been with the team 8 days. He goes out there on Thursday Night Football and leads the Bengals to a win over the Steelers with a great game. Joe Flacco, the next few weeks, despite the one loss, had the Bengals with the top scoring offense in the NFL. What a job the 40-year-old did as the Bengals quarterback in relief of Joe Burrow, in relief of Jake Browning, and trying everything he could to keep the season afloat until Burrow gets back, and really being a guy that, as a former Raven, as a former Brown, that, Bengals fans kind of sort of love to hate over that span, and really endeared himself to Bengals fans and became a guy that you love to root for. And, I think there's a world where Flacco may think that based on what he did, and what he did was incredible, that there is a spot out there somewhere for him as a starter. And I would love for him to go look for that and find that opportunity, if that opportunity still exists. But if it doesn't, why not come back to Cincinnati? Why not try and be there again? We know that Burrow's health from time to time is in question. And why not stick around? Why not still be that veteran in the ear that's seen so many things, that's won a Super Bowl? Why not stick around? If you're going to be in the league and you're going to be a backup, why not come back to Cincinnati? I really hope that Joe Flacco is that guy. Mitchell Tinsley is our final nominee for the best new guy. What a breakout in the preseason against the Commanders with 2 touchdowns. And just continuing to be a consistent guy, a consistent pair of hands when maybe Andre Yoshiva isn't having the best game, or T. Higgins is out of the game with an injury, or Jamar's suspended. Being a receiver that's available and that can get open and that you can count on. Mitchell Tinsley was that guy this year and deserves a lot of credit for the play and finally finding a home in Cincinnati after some years where he was on the practice squad in Washington and things not quite working out. What Mitchell Tinsley was able to do this year in Cincinnati was definitely recognized as one of the best new guys. But our best new guy award has to go to Dalton Risner. What can you say about this offensive lineman? He played left guard. He played right guard. He was signed in the preseason to join the team. And what did he do? He helped anchor one of the best offensive lines in the NFL with his play, with his consistency, with his ability to rotate from either side and be the guy that they needed depending on injury. He turned into a fan favorite. I mean, he's been a fan favorite for a couple of years now, and he hasn't even been on the team. He's been a guy that the Bengals fans are begging for. But Dalton Risner, you are our winner for best new guy, beating a really stacked list of players here. And we can't thank you enough. And we hope that you are going to come back, that the Bengals decide to bring you back, give you some stability, give you a contract that is over a year because you're still young enough. So I hope that Dalton Risner is a guy that we see in stripes. And I know Amarius Mims is really a guy he hopes to see for years to come. This is not an award that typically gets handed out in award shows. The 2025 player you love to hate. These are nominees for guys that you've thrown your remote at the screen over. These are guys that you've yelled 4-letter bombs at for plays that you just can't understand why they continue to ruffle your feathers and fail to do their jobs, essentially. These are the guys that have the most hate online and have really failed to live up to expectations. The 4 nominees are Noah Fant. Noah Fant was a guy we were so excited to have when we brought him in. This is a guy that thought like, okay, well, this is now another great receiving tight end that is going to put up, numbers, go into the rotation, be a guy. And what did he do? He caught the first touchdown of the season for the Bengals in Cleveland, week 1. It just looked like he was going to be a matchup nightmare that was going to help take our offense to the next level. Instead, what he ended up doing was having one of the most dubious stats in NFL history. Noah Fant fumbled 3 times in 2025, and all 3 times those fumbles were taken back the other way for a touchdown. So a fumble 6, all 3 for Noah Fant. And to even make that stat uglier for the Bengals offense as a whole, in all 3 of those games where he had a fumble 6, the quarterback, whether it was Browning, Flacco, or Burrow, all 3 got in on this, also threw a pick 6 in that game. Never happened in NFL history before. So, yeah, a lot of love to hate Noah Fant tweets out there circling around. A lot of Noah Fant, what WTFs thrown at the TV this season. Fig Newton, Josh Fig Newton, I think makes this list mostly for his play on the final touchdown for the Bears in that come from behind miracle win, where he just looked lost in his coverage. Like he didn't know. I'm not sure he knew what he was supposed to do on that play. I'm not sure he knew where Jordan Battle was supposed to be on that play. I'm not sure he knew anything on that play completely, to be completely honest. But that play broke their backs, and the Bengals lost that game that, with a season so razor thin on the difference between winning the division and a couple of nail-biter losses, that was one that could have had given some real stakes to Week 18 as far as making the playoffs for the Bengals. Andre Yoshiva, we talked about Mitchell Tinsley's emergence. A lot of that comes by Andre having a really down year as far as hands. A lot of drops from Yoshiva, a lot of routes where it seemed like he wasn't in the right place or where he should have been on that. And Andre just not fit, the 5th most targets on the team, but the 4th most receptions, a 400 receiver, 2 touchdowns. I mean, obviously you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and they're going to get a majority of those. But, Andre's a guy that we thought was going to be a big red zone threat after the last couple of years, being that big red zone body that Burrow's come to really, really trust. Just not the year for him this year. Maybe we get a return to form next year. Maybe he's in a roster battle based on how free agency and the draft plays out, but we'll have to see. And the final guy is a guy that, myself included, probably yelled at the TV most this year, and that's safety Geno Stone. A guy that had a really rough start to the year, then had a 2-game stretch where all of a sudden was making plays and tackles and was like, oh, maybe the light turned on and they figured each other out. And then I watched the last 5 or 6 games go by and him go back to his old ways of not being a tackler downfield, not being a tackler near the line of scrimmage, and not bringing in the interceptions the way he was before and with bad hands. So Geno Stone is our final nominee. And the award for the 2025 player you love to hate, the most I saw online, has to be Geno Stone. Geno, now an unrestricted free agent. I'm going to say there is a snowball's chance in hell that Geno Stone is back with the Bengals in 2026. From the start, he felt like a double agent from the Ravens that was sent here to lose games for the Bengals, even though he had his fair share of defensive touchdowns and things at times. But 1 play, 2 plays, versus an entire season of missed tackles and bad angles and broken coverages. So for Geno Stone, you win the award, the inaugural 2025 player you love to hate. and that's Geno Stone. The feel-good moment for 2025 for me, we talked about it a little bit earlier, is Joe Flacco coming in 8 days and slaying the Steelers at home in the White Tiger in prime time on Amazon. What a night. What a night for fans. I mean, after the game, fans are chanting Flacco while he's at the desk talking to him. The quarterback run for a first down, just the moxie that Joe Flacco had, in his tenure here, especially early on, not knowing the playbook, but just sort of winging it and figuring it out on the fly. That night, what a game. That gave Bengals fans so much hope, so much enthusiasm and excitement that, you know what, I think we're going to be able to hold on here until Burrow comes back, and Joe Flacco is going to be that guy. I think there was even talk online about if Joe Flacco continues to play like this, and he had a stretch where the Bengals were the number one scoring offense in the NFL with him at quarterback. Fans were actually debating if Burrow's healthy, do they bench Flacco to go back to Burrow? Like, it was wild. It was Linsanity level excitement for Flacco over that stretch. And like Linsanity, it eventually, tuckered out. And I think a lot of that had to do with him separating his throwing shoulder and then not being able to, really get behind the ball and unload it. But man, he had what an incredible story, right? I think when Flacco retires, he's going to look back at his run to the Super Bowl and how elite he was in the playoffs and the Super Bowl MVP. And then he's going to look back at what he did when he joined the Bengals and what he was able to do and how he embraced the city and how these teammates embraced him and the things he did to do his absolute best to keep this team afloat while Burrow was injured and in relief of Jake Browning. And I wish there was a more catchy name for like the Linsanity, but what Joe Flacco did was really incredible. And I'm going to look back at this as maybe my most fondest memory of 2025. The 2025 football gods must hate us moment is a tie. It is the injuries to Joe Burrow and Trey Hendrickson that really just, for the most part, sucked the life out of a season that looked like it was going to be promising. 2-0. We got the fast start we were looking for. And then the injuries happened. The wheels fell off the defense. And ultimately the season. And unfortunately, our last memory of Trey Hendrickson is going to be an injury and, not making the move at the trade deadline to get anything for him. And we'll just have to remember fonder times with Trey. But Burrow being able to come back was amazing. He was so good so early on. And then that Bills game hit and really derailed things. But or that Bills fourth quarter hit, I should say, because he was lights out in the first three. But the football gods must hate us in 2025 because they took Joe Burrow and Trey Hendrickson from us for too many games. My potential breakout player for 2026 is going to be second-year linebacker Demetrius Knight Jr. I think he flashed all the athleticism we thought he had, over 100 tackles, 4 sacks, getting his hands on some passes with 7 breakups and 2 interceptions, which is a pretty well-rounded year, even a forced fumble to throw into that. I think, the valuable reps, the valuable experience he was able to gain is really going to help him and take that next step and a big leap into his sophomore season in the NFL. And I think this is going to be a guy that, we're going to be able to trust and maybe has more of a leadership voice in year 2. and helps turn this unit around and build off some of the momentum. Now, we built up, we had some momentum the year before, and we saw where that happened. So we know it all needs to be, it doesn't carry over into the next season. But what does carry over is experience and understanding what you saw. And with a full offseason with the Bengals and another year under his belt, I think Demetrius Knight Jr. is the guy that is our breakout player in 2026. Let's talk about this offseason. That's going to finish up the awards. Let's talk about this offseason where we're looking at needing really a dominant interior pass rusher. We lost out by one pick on the guy that Bengals fans were drooling over in the draft process last year. That was Walter Nolan, who went to the Cardinals one pick before. They really need that 3-tech pass rusher on this team. They could still use defensive ends. They're going to lose Trey Hendrickson. They may lose Joseph Osai. They are going to need some help at that position. And linebacker will be something they need. And on offense, I think they need a slot receiver, like an inside guy. They haven't replaced Tyler Boyd since he left. And that's what they really, truly need at the wide receiver position, as well as replacing some tight ends that are free agents and expected to leave the roster. But now I am so excited because a good friend of mine is here to join us. And let's welcome in the Bengals great, Bengals legend, Willie Anderson. Big Willie, what's up, brother?
What's up, man? What's going on, man?
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
I don't have any audio for you, Will.
Hold on, let me see. Can I?
Shoot. Try talking for me one more time, Will.
1 2 1 2. How about now?
Damn it.
It said my mic was on.
Yeah, I'm not. Man, I appreciate coming on, but I don't have any audio for you.
It says my mic is on.
And your mic is up.
How about now?
Well, all right. So having some technical difficulties, unfortunately. Let's see if we can bring Willie in one more time and see how that works. Hopefully we get some audio here. Big Willie.
Can you hear me now?
Man, brother,
I'm
so sorry. For whatever reason, your mic is going, but I am not hearing you.
What was it?
I have a feeling it's probably something on my end and not yours. That's all I can think of because I'm sure you've done everything. I can see that we've got some audio coming in, but it's not transferring to me. I'm not sure if the viewers are seeing you, but sorry, Big Will. All right, so sorry about that, guys. I'm going to wrap up here. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Willie Anderson's audio to work. Maybe some gremlins here on my side. Before we sign off, I just wanted to say one more thing so that it wasn't so negative. Do we see some light at the end of the tunnel here for the Bengals? Yes, absolutely. You still have the ultimate quarterback. You still have the best receiving duo in the NFL. You still have a top 10. Hopefully they bring the guys back. Offensive line, which made life so much more exciting for Chase Brown and was a great pass blocking offensive line. So it's still something positive. What they're going to do in free agency without a big contract to have to weigh them down like Trey Hendrickson, they are going to have to go after free agency on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe we get a class like the 2021 class that really took them to the Super Bowl, where you got a big veteran safety, you got a defensive tackle. They got players that help bring them, Mike Hilton, DJ Reader. They got the guys to really lift them to the next level and bring this team back. I definitely see a light at the end of this tunnel. Guys that showed improvement with more playing time, they get better. The Miles Murphys, the DJ Turners, Dax Hill. I think they are going to have a really, really good team in 2026 and show us that they are the team that we thought they were going to be and finally live up to expectations and get back into the playoffs. I want to remind you, if you enjoyed yourself, smash that like button, subscribe. We're going to have content all throughout the offseason. We're doing live streams. We're doing scouting shows, breaking down prospects and showing the process of really evaluating players as we lead up to the NFL draft. We'll have full free agency coverage with day recaps through free agents, the free agent frenzy period. So if you like what you saw, continue to rock what Sovah says. Thank you to everyone who came through. Thank you so much, Big Willie. I'm so sorry that we had the audio issues we did. Man, that really sucked. I would have loved to have got your point of view on this. But thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.